They called him a traitor for helping the injured cop. But when they learned about his father's story, everyone fell silent. The alarm blared at 5:30 a.m. Jaden Thompson's hand shot out from under the thin blanket, smacking the phone screen. His feet hit the cold floor as he sat up in the darkness, hands rubbing his face. The mirror showed dark circles under his eyes. He'd been up late ironing his only white dress shirt. "Today's different," he muttered, buttoning the shirt carefully. His fingers traced over a small stain near the collar that hadn't come out in the wash. The rest of his outfit lay ready on the chair. Khaki pants from the thrift store, his father's old belt, and the only pair of dress shoes he owned, polished until they gleamed. Down the hall, his mother's bedroom door creaked open. Sarah Thompson's scrubs rustled as she walked to the kitchen, her footsteps heavy after a 12-hour night shift at Detroit General. "You're up early, baby," she said, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. She leaned against the doorframe of his room, still in her blue scrubs. "Got those interviews today," Jaden replied, adjusting his collar for the 10th time. Trying to look professional, Sarah crossed the room and helped straighten his shirt. Her hands trembled slightly. She'd been picking up extra shifts since they cut her hours at the hospital. "Your daddy would be proud, seeing you like this." The mention of his father made Jaden's chest tighten. 3 years had passed since the robbery gone wrong at the convenience store where James Thompson had stopped for milk on his way home from work. Some nights, Jaden still woke up wondering if he'd done enough to help his mom cope with the loss. "I made you some coffee," Jaden said, changing the subject. "It's still hot." Sarah smiled, the exhaustion lines around her eyes deepening. "Always taking care of your mama, but you need to focus on yourself today. Those interviews are important." Jaden grabbed his backpack, checking one more time that his resumes were neatly tucked inside a folder. The morning news played quietly from the living room TV, the anchor's voice serious. Tensions remain high in Detroit following another incident of alleged police brutality. "Turn that off," Sarah called out. "You don't need that negativity today." Outside their apartment, Mrs. Rodriguez from next door struggled with her groceries. Jaden immediately jogged over, taking the heavy bags from her arms. "Gracias, mijito," she said, patting his cheek. "You look very handsome today." "Job interviews, Mrs. Rodriguez," he explained, carrying the bags up to her door. "Trying to help Mom out with the bills." Her face softened. "You're a good boy, Jaden, just like your father." The morning sun hadn't yet burned through Detroit's industrial haze as Jaden walked toward his first interview. The convenience store where his father died was just visible at the end of the block. Jaden always crossed the street before reaching it, his heart racing until he passed. The first interview was at a shipping company warehouse. The manager, a heavy-set white man with thinning hair, barely glanced at Jaden's resume. "Sorry, kid. We need someone with more experience." "I'm a quick learner," Jaden started, but the manager was already looking past him at the next applicant. Walking to his second interview, Jaden passed Morrison's Market. Mr. Morrison tracked his movement through the store windows, following each step with suspicious eyes. Jaden kept his hands visible, walking straight ahead, swallowing the familiar anger that rose in his throat. 3 blocks from his next interview, Jaden noticed a crowd gathering near the courthouse. Signs were being unfolded, voices rising in familiar chants. His phone buzzed, a news alert about a protest forming downtown. He checked his watch. The interview was in 20 minutes. If he hurried, he could make it. But as he tried to navigate around the growing crowd, more people poured in from side streets. Signs rose above heads. "Justice Now" and "Stop Police Violence" and "Black Lives Matter." Jaden's phone buzzed again. This time it was his mother. "Be careful today, baby. They're saying protests are starting up again." He typed back quickly, "I'm okay. Heading to my interview." But the crowd was swelling, and somewhere in the distance, police sirens began to wail. The morning sun climbed higher over Detroit, burning away the haze and revealing the growing tension in the streets below. Jaden stood at the edge of the crowd, his carefully ironed shirt already beginning to stick to his back, as the city held its breath for what would come next. A new wave of protesters surged forward, pushing him closer to the courthouse steps. His resume folder crinkled in his tight grip as he tried to find a path through. The second interview was slipping away with each passing minute, but the mass of people had become a current, pulling him deeper into what was about to unfold. Around him, Faces he recognized from school and the neighborhood joined the crowd. Some nodded to him, others called out, but Jaden kept his eyes forward, searching for an exit. He had promises to keep, to his mother, to himself, to the memory of his father. But history had other plans for Jaden Thompson that morning, as the crowd's energy began to shift from peaceful protest to something more volatile. The sun climbed higher, and with it, the temperature of the gathering storm. The protest swelled like a living thing. Jaden watched Marcus Johnson, his lab partner from chemistry class, raise a megaphone to his lips. The chants grew louder, more coordinated. No justice. No peace. Jaden's phone vibrated again. The second interview was in 10 minutes, already a lost cause. His thumb hovered over the number, considering whether to call and reschedule when he heard his name. "Yo, Jay, what you doing standing there like a statue?" Deshaun Williams pushed through the crowd, his Detroit Tigers cap turned backward, sweat already darkening his shirt. He'd been Jaden's best friend since third grade. "I had interviews," Jaden said, gesturing to his dress clothes. "Didn't plan on being here." Deshaun's face hardened. "Man, something's more important than interviews. You forget what happened to me last week." The memory hit fresh. Deshaun pressed against a police car, hands behind his back, while an officer searched his backpack. No reason given. No apology when they found nothing. "Of course I didn't forget," Jaden said. "But my mom, your mom would understand. This is about all of us." Deshaun grabbed Jaden's shoulder. "Remember what happened to your pops? System's been broken. Time to make them hear us." More familiar faces emerged from the crowd. Tanya from his English class. Marcus's younger brother Kevin. Even Mr. Washington from the community center, usually so calm and collected, was there with a sign reading, "Enough is enough." The first police cars arrived, parking at a distance. Officers stepped out slowly, hands on their belts, watching. The crowd's energy shifted. Jaden felt it in his bones, the collective intake of breath, the tensing of shoulders. "They're trying to intimidate us," someone shouted. "Don't let them scare you." Jaden's phone buzzed one final time before dying. He'd forgotten to charge it last night, too focused on preparing for the interviews. The resume folder was getting crushed in his grip, papers wrinkled beyond saving. A line of officers formed at the courthouse steps. Among them, Jaden spotted a familiar face. Officer Martinez, the same one who'd stopped Deshaun last week. She stood slightly apart from the others, her expression more uncertain. "Look who it is," Deshaun muttered, following Jaden's gaze. "Bet she's proud of herself." The summer heat pressed down harder. Sweat trickled down Jaden's back, his carefully ironed shirt now a mess. The crowd pushed forward, then back, like waves against a shore. Each surge brought them closer to the police line. Marcus's voice boomed through the megaphone. "We're here peacefully. We have the right to protest." But peaceful was becoming a fragile word. Jaden saw water bottles being passed through the crowd, some to drink, others to throw. Anger rippled through the gathered mass of people. 3 years of pain and fear and frustration building toward a break. "You seen enough yet?" Deshaun asked. "Or are you still thinking about those interviews?" Before Jaden could answer, a new chant started. "Say his name. Say his name." The name belonged to Michael Carter, 19 years old, shot during a traffic stop last week. No body cam footage released. No official statement beyond incident under investigation. More police vehicles arrived. Officers in riot gear began to emerge, face shields catching the sun. The sight sent a ripple of tension through the crowd. "They're going to try to shut us down," someone yelled. "Don't let them." Jaden thought of his mother at home, probably sleeping after her night shift. She'd wake up soon, check her phone, see the news. His chest tightened. A helicopter appeared overhead, its blades chopping through the humid air. News vans pulled up at the edges of the gathering, cameras already rolling. The world was watching Detroit again, waiting to see what would happen. "They're moving!" The shout came from the front of the crowd. The police line was advancing slowly, shields up. Officer Martinez moved with them, but her steps seemed hesitant. The space between protesters and police shrunk foot by foot. "Stand your ground," Marcus called through the megaphone. "We have the right to be here." Jaden saw the first bottle arc through the air, glinting in the sunlight. It fell short of the police line, shattering on the courthouse steps. The sound was like a starting gun. More objects followed. "Don't throw anything," Mr. Washington shouted, but his voice was lost in the chaos. The police line stopped advancing. A voice came through a bullhorn. "This is an unlawful assembly. Disperse immediately." No one moved. The crowd's chants grew louder, drowning out the warning. Jaden felt himself being pushed forward by the mass of people behind him. His dress shoes slipped on the pavement. "Jay!" Deshaun grabbed his arm, steadying him. "Stay close." More bottles flew. A rock followed, then another. The police line tensed visibly, shields raising higher. Officer Martinez took a step back, her hand moving to her radio. The helicopter circled lower, its downdraft whipping signs and banners. News cameras captured everything. Jaden saw himself on the edge of history, dressed for interviews he'd never make, watching his city balance on a knife's edge. Then someone threw something heavier, a brick torn from the broken sidewalk. Time seemed to slow as it spun through the air. Officer Martinez looked up at the wrong moment, her shield slightly lowered. The impact knocked her backward. Her helmet hit the courthouse steps with a crack that seemed to echo across the square. She didn't get up. For a moment, everything stopped. The chants died. The helicopter's beat seemed to fade. Jaden stared at the fallen officer, remembering another moment 3 years ago. His father on a convenience store floor, helped too far away to matter. Then the world rushed back in with a roar. The police line broke, officers rushing to their fallen colleague. The crowd surged backward, panic replacing anger. Someone shoved past Jaden, knocking him sideways. His resume folder fell, papers scattering across the pavement like leaves in a storm. But Jaden wasn't watching them anymore. His eyes were fixed on Officer Martinez, lying motionless on the courthouse steps, while history held its breath to see what he would do next. Time crystallized into a single moment. Officer Martinez lay motionless on the courthouse steps, her helmet askew. The crowd had created a vacuum around her, protesters backing away. Officers pushed forward by the surging mass of people. "Jay, we gotta move." Deshaun pulled at his arm, but Jaden stood frozen. His father's voice echoed in his head, a memory from years ago. "The world's gonna try to tell you who you are, son. Don't let it. You decide that for yourself." Officer Martinez's chest rose and fell slightly. She was breathing. Blood trickled from beneath her helmet. "Medical!" An officer was shouting into his radio. "Officer down. We need medical." But the ambulances would take time to get through the chaos. Jaden knew this like he knew his own name. He'd lived it before, watching EMTs fight through traffic while his father bled out on a convenience store floor. "What are you thinking?" Deshaun's voice cut through his thoughts. "Jay." Jaden's feet moved before his brain could stop them. One step, then another toward the fallen officer. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Get back here." The space between protesters and police became a no-man's land, with Jaden walking slowly across it. His dress shoes clicked against the pavement. Every eye watched him. Cops with their hands on their weapons, protesters with phones raised to record whatever happened next. "Son, stay back." An officer raised his shield, but Jaden kept walking. "I know first aid," he said, his voice steadier than his hands. "My mom's a nurse. Let me help." The officer hesitated. Behind him, others had their hands on their weapons. The crowd behind Jaden had gone quiet, watching. "Please," Jaden said. "She needs help now." An older officer with sergeant's stripes stepped forward. "Let him through." Jaden knelt beside Officer Martinez. Up close, he could see she was young, probably not much older than his cousin Lisa. Blood matted her hair where the helmet had failed to protect her. "Officer Martinez?" He kept his voice low, calm, like his mother did with scared patience. "Can you hear me?" A weak groan answered him. Her eyes fluttered but didn't open. "I need to check your neck and spine," he said, loud enough for the officers to hear. "Please don't move." His hands trembled as he felt for her pulse, rapid but strong. The first aid training from the community center kicked in. Check breathing, check circulation, check for major bleeding. "Traitor," someone hissed from the crowd. The word stung, but Jaden kept working. "She's got a strong pulse. he reported to the sergeant. Breathing's regular. Probable concussion from the impact and fall. More sirens wailed in the distance. The helicopter circled lower, its camera capturing everything. Jaden knew his mother would see this on the news. She'd recognize his white shirt, now stained with Officer Martinez's blood. "Stay with me," he told the officer as she stirred again. "Help's coming. Just stay still." Her eyes opened slightly, unfocused. "Can't see right?" "That's normal with a concussion. Try not to move." The crowd's mood was shifting. Some still shouted angry words, but others had lowered their phones, their expressions changing from anger to something more complicated. "You know her?" the sergeant asked, kneeling beside him. Jaden nodded. "She stopped my friend last week." No reason given. The sergeant absorbed this, but said nothing. Officer Martinez's hand moved, trying to reach a radio. Jaden gently stopped her. "You need to stay still until the paramedics check your spine." "Why?" She managed, her eyes focusing slightly. "Why are you helping?" The question hung in the air. Behind them, the crowd pressed closer, listening. The line of officers tensed. "Because my father bled out waiting for an ambulance," Jaden said quietly. "And I couldn't help him. But I can help you." Tears mixed with blood on Officer Martinez's face. The sergeant put a hand on Jaden's shoulder. The ambulance sirens grew closer, but were still blocks away. The summer heat pressed down, making Jaden's dress shirt stick to his back. He'd missed both interviews now. His mother would worry when she woke up and saw the missed calls. "The crowd's getting restless," an officer warned. Jaden glanced back. The space around them had shrunk as protesters pushed forward for a better view. Deshawn stood at the front, his expression unreadable. "Back up," the sergeant ordered. "Give them space." But the crowd's energy was building again. Someone threw another bottle. It shattered harmlessly yards away, but the sound made Officer Martinez flinch. "It's okay," Jaden told her. "You're going to be okay." More objects flew. The police line reformed, shields up. But Jaden stayed where he was, one hand on Officer Martinez's wrist, monitoring her pulse. "You should go," she whispered. "Not safe." Jaden thought of his father again, of watching helplessly as life slipped away. "I'm staying." The ambulance was close now, its siren cutting through the noise of the crowd. But the streets were blocked with people and vehicles. It would still take time. A rock struck a shield near them, the impact loud as a gunshot. Officer Martinez tried to sit up. "Don't move," Jaden said firmly. "Please. Trust me." Their eyes met. Something passed between them, an understanding beyond uniforms and protests and the weight of history. "Okay," she whispered. "I trust you." The crowd surged forward again. Officers raised their shields. The helicopter's camera captured it all. A black teenager in a blood-stained white shirt, kneeling beside a fallen officer, while the city held its breath to see what would happen next. Jaden's father had taught him that moments of choice define a person. As the chaos swirled around him, Jaden Thompson chose to stay, his hand steady on Officer Martinez's wrist, counting her heartbeats while waiting for help to arrive. The ambulance siren wailed closer. The summer sun beat down, and in that space between protest and police line, past and present met on the courthouse steps, waiting to see which way the future would break. The crowd's anger found a new target. "Uncle Tom!" someone shouted. Others took up the cry. Jaden kept his eyes on Officer Martinez's face, trying to block out the voices. His mother's training echoed in his head, a memory from last summer when she taught him basic first aid after finding him watching videos of his father's shooting. "Focus on what you can do," she'd said, demonstrating proper head stabilization. "Block everything else out. The patient is all that matters. Clear a path." The sergeant's voice boomed over the noise. "Ambulance coming through." But the crowd was too dense, too angry. Protesters pushed against the police line, phones recording everything. Jaden heard his name being called, voices he recognized from school, from the neighborhood. "Get up, Jay." That was Marcus Johnson's voice through the megaphone. "Don't help them. They wouldn't help you." Officer Martinez stirred. "They hate me," she whispered. "They're scared," Jaden replied, checking her pupils again. "Fear makes people cruel sometimes." A water bottle exploded against a nearby shield, spraying them both. Officer Martinez flinched, then gasped in pain. Try not to move, Jaden said, wiping water from her face. Might have a neck injury. Why aren't you scared? She asked. The question hit him hard. He was terrified of the crowd's anger, of the officers' suspicious glances, of what his mother would think when she saw this on the news. But another memory surfaced. His father teaching him to swim at Belle Isle Beach. The current's strong, his dad had said. But you're stronger. Don't fight it. Work with it. Stay calm and keep moving. I am scared, Jaden told Officer Martinez. But someone once taught me that being brave isn't about not feeling fear. It's about doing what's right anyway. A fresh wave of shouts rose from the crowd. Jaden looked up to see Deshawn pushing through to the front. Jay! His friend's face was twisted with emotion. Man, your father would be ashamed. The words struck like physical blows. Jaden's hands trembled as he kept them steady on Officer Martinez's neck brace. You're wrong, he said, loud enough for Deshawn to hear. My father died because nobody helped him. Nobody wanted to get involved. I'm not doing that. Not ever again. The ambulance siren was closer now, but still too far. The summer heat had become unbearable. Sweat dripped into Jaden's eyes, stinging. Her people killed your father, someone shouted. They let him die. No, Jaden said, but his voice was lost in the noise. Officer Martinez grabbed his wrist. I remember that night, she said weakly. I was just out of academy. We tried to get there. Save your strength, Jaden told her, but she continued. The traffic was gridlocked. We couldn't. I'm so sorry. Tears mixed with blood on her face. Jaden felt his own eyes burning. It wasn't your fault, he said. Just like this isn't my fault or their fault. We're all just... He stopped, remembering his mother's words about focusing on what he could do. The police line was buckling under the crowd's pressure. More objects flew overhead. The sergeant barked orders into his radio, calling for backup. ETA on that ambulance? Jaden called out. 3 minutes, someone answered. Streets are blocked. Officer Martinez's grip on his wrist tightened. If something happens, my daughter... Nothing's going to happen, Jaden said firmly. I'm not leaving. We just need to hold on a little longer. The helicopter swooped lower, its downdraft creating a wind tunnel of debris. Signs and papers swirled around them. Jaden's ruined resume fluttered past like dead leaves. Those were for my interviews, he said mostly to himself. Officer Martinez tried to focus on his face. What kind of job? Anything, he admitted. Mom's hours got cut at the hospital. Bills are piling up. My mom was a nurse too, she said. Detroit General. Same as my mom. Sarah Thompson. Recognition flickered in Officer Martinez's eyes. The night shift supervisor? She helped when my daughter was sick last year. The world shifted slightly on its axis. Connections formed like bridges across a divide that had seemed uncrossable moments before. Another surge from the crowd pushed the police line back several feet. Officers stumbled, shields locked together. The sergeant grabbed Jaden's shoulder. We need to move her. It's not safe here. No, Jaden and Officer Martinez said together. Spinal injury risk, Jaden explained. Moving her could paralyze her. We wait for the EMTs. The sergeant hesitated, then nodded. Form a tighter circle, he ordered his officers. Protect them both. The shield wall closed around them, creating a small island of relative calm. Through gaps between officers, Jaden could see familiar faces in the crowd, teachers, neighbors, classmates. Some looked angry, others confused. A few had stopped shouting, watching with uncertain expressions. Deshawn's voice cut through the chaos. Jay, last chance, man. Get up and walk away. Jaden looked at his best friend since 3rd grade. I can't. Then you're not my brother anymore. The words hurt worse than any thrown bottle could. But Jaden's hands remained steady as he monitored Officer Martinez's vitals. Your father would be proud, she whispered. I hope so, Jaden said. I'm trying to be the man he raised me to be. The ambulance siren grew louder. Almost there. Officer Martinez's pulse was steady under his fingers. The shield wall held around them. And in that moment, kneeling on the courthouse steps in his ruined interview clothes, Jaden Thompson knew he was exactly where he needed to be. The current of history pulled at him, but he remained anchored to this one simple truth. Every life had value, regardless of the uniform it wore or the color of its skin. His father had died alone on a convenience store floor, but Officer Martinez wouldn't. Not today. Not while Jaden could still do something about it. The ambulance turned onto their street, lights flashing through the summer haze. Help was coming. They just had to hold on a little longer. The ambulance's progress slowed to a crawl. Through gaps in the police line, Jaden saw the problem. Protesters had linked arms across the street, blocking its path. They're not letting them through, he told Officer Martinez, trying to keep the worry from his voice. Her pulse had become more erratic in the past few minutes. The sergeant crouched beside them. We might have to clear a path by force. No, Jaden said quickly. Let me try something. He stood slowly, hands raised to show he meant no harm. The news helicopters circled closer, cameras capturing every moment. Please, he called out, his voice carrying across the sudden quiet. I know you're angry. I'm angry too. But this isn't about sides anymore. She's hurt bad. She needs help. Marcus Johnson lowered his megaphone. She's one of them Jays. She's someone's mother, Jaden replied. Just like I'm someone's son. Just like my father was someone's son before he died waiting for help that came too late. The words hung in the humid air. Some protesters shifted uncomfortably. You trying to make us feel guilty? Someone shouted. No, I'm asking you to be better than what you're fighting against. We want justice. This is how it starts. With mercy. Officer Martinez stirred. Jaden, he knelt back down quickly. I'm here. Stay still. Her eyes were clearer now, but filled with pain. Tell them I'm sorry about your friend. About the stop last week. I should, Jaden said. Save your strength. But Deshawn had heard. He pushed to the front of the crowd again, his face a storm of emotions. You remember that? He demanded. You remember stopping me for no reason? Officer Martinez tried to nod, then winced. Yes, I was wrong. I let fear make me stupid. I'm sorry. The crowd rippled with murmurs. Deshawn stood frozen, jaw working. Move back, someone shouted. Let the ambulance through. The human chain across the street began to break apart. The ambulance inched forward. Jaden's phone buzzed in his pocket. Someone had charged it enough to power back on. Missed calls from his mother filled the screen. As if summoned by the thought, a familiar voice cut through the noise. Jaden, baby, let me through. The crowd parted. Sarah Thompson, still in her scrubs from the night shift, pushed through. Her eyes went wide at the sight of her son's blood-stained shirt. I'm okay, Mom, he called out. But she needs help. Sarah's nurse training took over. She crossed the no-man's land between protesters and police, ignoring the tension around her. I'm a registered nurse, she told the sergeant. Let me help. The shield wall opened to let her through. She knelt beside Officer Martinez, fingers quickly finding pulse points. Lisa Martinez, the officer whispered. You helped my daughter. Recognition flashed across Sarah's face. Little Maria? With the asthma attack. Yes. She's tacky, Sarah told Jaden, switching to professional mode. Good job keeping her still. Any loss of consciousness? Initially, yes. Pupils were uneven, but they're normalizing. Possible spinal injury from the fall. Pride flickered across Sarah's face as she checked Jaden's assessment. The ambulance was closer now, its siren cutting through the muggy air. Deshawn stepped forward again. Mrs. Thompson, not now, Deshawn, Sarah said without looking up. Either help us or step back. More protesters lowered their phones. Some began to disperse, the energy shifting from anger to uncertainty. The police line relaxed slightly. BP's dropping, Sarah announced. Where's that ambulance? As if in answer, the emergency vehicle turned the final corner. EMTs jumped out, equipment ready. Probable concussion with brief loss of consciousness, Sarah reported as they approached. Possible cervical injury. Son's been keeping her stabilized. The senior EMT nodded. Good work, kid. We'll take it from here. But as they moved to transfer Officer Martinez to a backboard, she grabbed Jaden's hand. Thank you, she whispered. For being braver than me. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Jaden felt his own eyes burning. Just returning what your daughter gave my mom, he said. A chance to help. The EMTs worked quickly, securing neck brace and backboard. Sarah helped direct the transfer, her movements sure and professional. "Mom," Jaden said suddenly, "I miss my interviews." "Baby, you just aced the biggest interview of your life." She touched his cheek. "Your father would be so proud." The crowd had thinned considerably. News cameras followed the EMTs as they loaded Officer Martinez into the ambulance. The remaining protesters watched in silence. Deshawn stepped forward one last time. "Jay." "Not now," Jaden said quietly. I just can't right now." His oldest friend nodded slowly. "I feel you, but we need to talk. Soon." The ambulance doors closed. The siren wailed to life. As it pulled away, Jaden felt the weight of the past hours settle onto his shoulders. His dress shirt was ruined. The interviews were missed. Half his friends probably hated him now, but when he closed his eyes, he saw his father's face, smiling with pride. "Let's get you home," Sarah said softly. "You need to rest?" "In a minute," Jaden replied, looking at the scattered protesters, the police line, the news cameras still rolling. I think there's something I need to say first." His mother squeezed his shoulder. "Take your time, baby. Some words need to find their moment." The summer sun hung high over Detroit, watching as Jaden Thompson tried to find the right words to bridge a divide that had seemed uncrossable just hours before. The current of history had brought him here. What happened next would depend on what he chose to say. The ambulance's siren faded into the distance. Jaden stood on the courthouse steps, his mother's hand steady on his shoulder, facing what remained of the crowd. News cameras tracked his every move. "I know some of you think I betrayed something back there," he began, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "Maybe I did, but I betrayed something 3 years ago too, when I watched my father die and couldn't do anything about it." The remaining protesters shifted uncomfortably. Even the police officers stood silent, listening. "I'm tired," Jaden continued. "Tired of watching people die when we could help them. Tired of picking sides when we're all just trying to survive in this city." A reporter pushed forward. "Young man, can you tell us your name?" "His name is Jaden Thompson," Deshawn called out before Jaden could answer. "And he's the best person I know, even if I forgot that for a minute back there." Sarah squeezed Jaden's shoulder as more reporters approached, shouting questions. "Did you know Officer Martinez? What made you decide to help? Are you involved in the protest movement?" The sergeant stepped between Jaden and the press. "The boy's been through enough." "Back up. I'm not a boy," Jaden said quietly. "And I can speak for myself." The sergeant studied him for a moment, then nodded and stepped aside. "My name is Jaden Thompson," he told the cameras. "My father was James Thompson. He died in a convenience store robbery 3 years ago because help didn't come in time. Today, I had a chance to make sure another family didn't feel that pain. That's all this was about." His phone buzzed again, messages pouring in from classmates, neighbors, strangers who'd seen the live coverage. A new voice cut through the chaos. "Jaden Thompson?" An older man in an expensive suit pushed through the crowd. "I'm Richard Martinez from Detroit General Hospital's Board of Directors. We've been watching the live coverage. I'd like to speak with you and your mother." Sarah's grip on Jaden's shoulder tightened. "About what?" "About your son's future, and possibly about your reduced hours situation." More cameras flashed. Jaden felt lightheaded suddenly, the morning's events catching up with him. "He needs to rest," Sarah said firmly, "and change his clothes. Whatever you want to discuss can wait." "Of course," Martinez handed her his card. "Call my office when you're ready. What I saw today, it's exactly what our community needs." As if his words broke a spell, the crowd began to disperse. Police officers returned to their vehicles. News crews packed up their equipment, though a few cameras still rolled. "Jay." Deshawn stepped forward, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "I said some things." "Yeah, you did. I was wrong. And I'm sorry." Jaden looked at his oldest friend, remembering countless summer days playing basketball, helping each other with homework, sharing dreams and fears. "I get why you were angry," he said finally. "I was angry too. Still am about a lot of things. But anger doesn't help anybody heal." Deshawn nodded slowly. "Your pops used to say that. Anger's just pain that doesn't know where to go." The memory hit Jaden hard. His legs buckled slightly, and Sarah quickly steadied him. "That's it," she announced. We're going home. Everyone else can wait. But as they turned to leave, Marcus Johnson approached, still holding his megaphone. The protest, he said. It wasn't supposed to go like this. Nobody was supposed to get hurt. They never are, Jaden replied. But people always do. A police car pulled up. The sergeant stepped out, holding something. Your resume folder, he said, handing it to Jaden. We collected what we could, but most of the copies are ruined. Jaden took the damp, crumpled folder. Thanks, but I guess I missed those interviews anyway. Son, the sergeant hesitated. What you did today, that took real courage. If you're still looking for work, the department has a youth outreach program. We could use someone like you. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on anyone. A small laugh escaped Jaden's throat, slightly hysterical. I think I need to sleep before I make any decisions, he said. Of course, but the offer stands. As they walked toward their car, more people approached, wanting to shake Jaden's hand, take pictures, ask questions. Sarah waved them all away. My son needs rest, she repeated firmly. You all know where to find us if you need to talk later. In the car, Jaden finally let his guard down. His hands started shaking uncontrollably. Deep breaths, Sarah instructed, navigating through the dispersing crowd. You're coming down from an adrenaline high. Mom, his voice cracked. Did I do the right thing? She glanced at him, her eyes wet. Baby, you did the only thing. Just like your father would have. My interviews will be rescheduled. Or maybe you'll find something better. But right now, you need to process what happened. They drove past Morrison's Market. Mr. Morrison stood outside, watching them pass. For the first time ever, he raised his hand in greeting. Jaden's phone kept buzzing. News alerts about the protest. Messages from friends. A text from Officer Martinez's daughter. Thank you for helping my mom. At their apartment, Mrs. Rodriguez waited by the stairs. Mi hijo, she hugged him tight. I saw everything on the TV. You made all of us proud today. Inside their apartment, the morning news played on loop. Footage of Jaden kneeling beside Officer Martinez, standing between anger and injury, choosing mercy over rage. Shower, Sarah ordered. Then sleep. The world can wait. But as Jaden headed to his room, he caught his reflection in the hallway mirror. His father's belt, his ruined white shirt, blood and sweat and tears marking a day when everything changed. Dad, he whispered to the empty hallway. I hope you saw that. I hope you understand why. The air conditioning hummed. Police sirens wailed in the distance. And somewhere in Detroit, Officer Martinez was getting the care she needed, her daughter holding her hand, because one teenager decided that healing mattered more than hate. Jaden Thompson stripped off his ruined interview clothes and stepped into the shower, letting the water wash away the morning's chaos. But some things couldn't be washed away. The choice he'd made, the bridges built and burned, the moment when theory met practice and he discovered exactly who he was. Tomorrow would bring more challenges. Interviews to reschedule, friends to reconcile with, decisions to make about his future. But for now, he let the water run until it turned cold, thinking about currents and choices, and the way life sometimes forced you to decide what kind of person you really were. Jaden woke to the sound of voices in the living room. The clock showed 6 p.m. He'd slept for almost 8 hours. He's still resting. His mother's voice carried through the door. And no, you can't wake him up for another interview. Mrs. Thompson, this is a national story now. People want to hear from him. People can wait. Jaden's phone had over 200 notifications. Text messages, voicemails, social media alerts. He scrolled through them slowly. From Deshaun, hospital called. Officer Martinez is stable. Concussion and whiplash, but no permanent damage. You did that, bro. From Marcus, meeting at the community center tonight. We need to talk about what happened. You should be there. From unknown numbers. You're a hero. Traitor. Thank you. How could you? A knock at his door. Baby? You awake? Yeah, Mom? Sarah entered, carrying a sandwich and fresh clothes. You need to eat. And there's something you should see. She handed him her tablet. Every local news site had his picture, kneeling beside Officer Martinez, standing on the courthouse steps, speaking to the cameras. The headlines varied. Teens Act of Mercy defuses protest tensions. Detroit youth bridges divide between police and protesters. James Thompson's son continues father's legacy of courage. They found the security footage, Sarah said quietly. From the night your father. They're running it alongside today's video, showing how he tried to help the robber even after being shot. Jaden put down the tablet. I don't want to see that. I know, baby, but people are seeing it. They're understanding why you did what you did. Another knock, more insistent. Mrs. Rodriguez's voice. Sarah, Channel 7 is here again. I'll handle it. Sarah squeezed his shoulder. Eat your sandwich. Jaden picked at the food, his appetite weak. His dress shirt hung on the door, blood and sweat stains setting into the fabric. He'd have to buy a new one for interviews, if anyone would still hire him after today. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Lisa Martinez. Maria wants to see you. We're in room 412 at Detroit General. Come if you can. Jaden stared at the message for a long moment. Through his window, he could see news vans parked along the street. Mom, he called out. I need to go somewhere. The living room was full of people, reporters, neighbors, what looked like a church group. Sarah stood in the middle of it all, arms crossed. Absolutely not, she said when he told her about the text. You need to rest. Mom, I need to do this. Their eyes met. After a long moment, she nodded. Mrs. Rodriguez will drive you. Back door. Through the alley. Avoid the cameras. The hospital corridors were oddly quiet. A few nurses recognized him, whispered as he passed. The elevator ride to the fourth floor felt longer than usual. Room 412's door was open. Officer Martinez lay in bed, neck brace stark white against her bruised skin. A girl about 12 sat beside her, holding her hand. Jaden. Officer Martinez smiled weakly. Meet Maria. The girl launched herself at him, wrapping him in a fierce hug. Thank you for helping my mom. Maria. Officer Martinez warned. Gentle. He's had a rough day too. Jaden returned the hug carefully. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a brick. She tried to laugh, then winced. But doctors say no permanent damage. Thanks to you. I just did what anyone should do. But they didn't. You did. She gestured to the TV mounted on the wall. They've been showing it all day. The footage of you staying. Of you talking to the crowd. You changed something today. Maria nodded eagerly. My whole class saw it. Everyone's talking about it. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Officer Martinez needs rest. And Jaden? There's someone here to see you. Jaden turned to find Deshawn in the hallway, looking uncomfortable in the hospital setting. Came to check on both of you, he said. And to tell you. The community center meeting? It's bigger than we thought. Everyone's there. Police representatives too. They're waiting for you. Jaden looked back at Officer Martinez. She smiled. Go. Make it mean something. The community center parking lot was full when they arrived. Inside, the usual basketball court had been transformed into a meeting space. Hundreds of faces turned as Jaden entered. Protesters from that morning. Police officers in uniform. Neighbors, teachers, strangers drawn by the news. Marcus Johnson stood at the microphone. Jaden Thompson, everybody. The applause started slowly, then built. Jaden walked to the front, his legs shaky. I didn't come for applause, he said when the noise died down. I came because we need to talk. Really talk. About what happened today and why. The sergeant from that morning stood. The department wants to formally thank you. No, Jaden interrupted. No thanks. No blame. Just truth. Officer Martinez stopped my friend last week for no reason except fear. That's truth. And today, people wanted to let her die for wearing a uniform. That's truth too. We're all scared. We're all angry. But what happened this morning? That can't be all we are. An older man raised his hand. I knew your father. Bought my paper from him every morning at that store. He died trying to talk down that robber, trying to help him even after being shot. You're just like him? No, Jaden's voice cracked. I'm trying to be. Every day. And maybe that's all any of us can do. Try to be better than our fears. The meeting lasted hours. People spoke. Angry voices, peaceful voices, voices that had never been heard before. Plans were made. Committees formed. A dialogue started. When Jaden finally left, the sun had set. His phone buzzed with a new message from Richard Martinez at Detroit General. The board met today. We'd like to offer you a full scholarship to our medical program. Your mother's hours have been restored with a promotion to department supervisor. Come see me tomorrow to discuss details." He showed the text to Deshawn, who grinned. "Look at you, changing the world." "Not the world," Jaden said. "Just one moment. One choice." They walked past the courthouse steps, now clean of any sign of that morning's chaos. But something had changed in the air in the city and themselves. "Your pops would be proud," Deshawn said finally. "For real?" Jaden looked up at the stars emerging over Detroit. "I know. And tomorrow we keep trying. That's all we can do." His ruined interview shirt hung in his closet at home, a reminder that sometimes the most important tests weren't the ones you prepared for, but the ones that found you when you least expected them. The next morning, Jaden stood in front of Morrison's Market, heart pounding. The help wanted sign still hung in the window. "You sure about this?" Deshawn asked beside him. "You got that hospital scholarship now. You don't need this job." "It's not about needing it," Jaden replied. "It's about finishing what I started." The bell chimed as they entered. Mr. Morrison looked up from his register, eyes widening in recognition. "Jaden Thompson," he said slowly. "I saw you on the news. I came about the job. Sir, I know I missed the interview yesterday, but you're hired." Jaden blinked. "What?" "You're hired," Mr. Morrison repeated. "I've been watching you walk past my store for 3 years. Always thought you were up to no good. Yesterday showed me how wrong I was. When can you start?" Today." "Good. There's a lot to do." Mr. Morrison hesitated. "And Jaden? I knew your father. He used to shop here. I should have said something before now." The morning passed in a blur of stocking shelves and learning the register. Around noon, Officer Martinez's daughter Maria came in with a friend. "Mom's coming home today," she announced, putting a candy bar on the counter. "She wants to know if you'll come visit." "I get off at 4, Jaden said, ringing up her purchase. "Cool. Oh, and the police department's having this community dinner thing next week. They want you to speak." Deshawn, arranging chips nearby, laughed. "Man, you're getting famous." "Not famous," Jaden corrected. "Just visible." The afternoon brought more visitors. Marcus Johnson came by with news about the community center programs teachers stopped in to tell him the school wanted to do an assembly. Even the sergeant from yesterday appeared, buying coffee and leaving his card. "Youth outreach offer still stands," he said. "Part-time, works around school hours." At 4 o'clock, Mr. Morrison called Jaden to the back office. "Your father," he said awkwardly. "The night he died, he was trying to talk that boy down. Kid couldn't have been more than 17. Your dad kept saying, 'Let me help you,' even after the shot." Jaden gripped the door frame. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because yesterday, when you helped that officer, you said the same words. Exact same words. 'Let me help you.' I heard it on the news." Mr. Morrison wiped his eyes. "Your daddy would be proud." Outside, Deshawn waited to walk with him to the hospital. The streets felt different now. People nodded as they passed, called out greetings. "It's weird," Deshawn said. "Yesterday morning, we were just us, you know? Now you're like something else. I'm still me. Now you changed. We all did." Officer Martinez's house was a small bungalow in a quiet neighborhood. She sat on the porch, neck brace still in place, watching Maria play in the yard. "The hero arrives," she called out weakly. "Not a hero," Jaden replied. "Just trying to be better than yesterday. Isn't that what a hero is?" She gestured to the chairs. "Sit. We need to talk." Maria ran up to hug Jaden, then dragged Deshawn off to see her new basketball hoop. Officer Martinez waited until they were out of earshot. "I've been thinking about that stop last week," she said. "About a lot of things. You don't have to dash, yes I do. Because that moment led to yesterday. If I hadn't stopped your friend, you might have walked past when that brick hit me. Everything connects." A patrol car drove by slowly. The officer inside waved. "I'm requesting a transfer," Officer Martinez continued, "to community outreach. Working with kids, building relationships. The kind of police work that should have been happening all along. Because of yesterday? Because it's time. Past time." She touched her neck brace gently. "Sometimes it takes a brick to the head to wake you up." They watched Maria showing Deshawn her jump shot. The evening light turned everything golden. "The department dinner next week," Officer Martinez said. Will you come? I don't know what to say to them. Say what you said yesterday. About choosing to help. About being tired of watching people die. She paused. About your father. Jaden's phone buzzed. A reminder about his meeting with the hospital board tomorrow. His future stretching out in new directions. Your mother called me this morning, Officer Martinez said. Told me about the night my Maria came into the ER. Said you were there, helping organize supplies. I remember. She couldn't breathe. And now she's teaching your friend basketball. Funny how life works. Deshawn's laugh carried across the yard as Maria scored a basket. The sound seemed to bridge the space between yesterday and tomorrow. I have a shift at Morrison's in the morning, Jaden said. But I'll come to the dinner. If Deshawn can come too. Already invited him. And Marcus. And about 20 other kids from yesterday. She smiled. Bridges don't work unless both sides are willing to cross. The sun set over Detroit, painting the sky in shades of possibility. Somewhere in the city, protesters and police were learning to see each other as people. A hospital board was rewriting the rules about community scholarships. A store owner was changing his assumptions about who belonged in his shop. And on a small porch, a black teenager and a Hispanic police officer watched their friends play basketball, proving that sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest choices. Your father, Officer Martinez, said softly. He tried to help that boy, didn't he? The one who shot him. Yeah, right until the end. You're his legacy, Jaden. Not just in what you did yesterday, but in what you'll do tomorrow. In the growing dark, Maria's basketball thumped against concrete. Deshawn called out pointers. Life continued its steady rhythm, changed and unchanged by yesterday's choices. I should get home. Jaden stood. Mom's making dinner. Tell her thank you. For raising a son like you. For being there when my Maria couldn't breathe. For everything. The walk home took them past the courthouse steps. Someone had left flowers there. Not for Officer Martinez, but for every person who'd ever needed help and didn't get it. You really gonna do all this? Deshawn asked. The hospital scholarship, the police dinner, Morrison's job? Yeah, because it all matters. The big stuff and the small stuff. Like stocking shelves and saving lives? Like learning to see each other. Really see each other. They passed Mr. Washington from the community center, who stopped his car to talk about program ideas. Then Mrs. Rodriguez, who insisted on sending food home to Sarah. Each interaction a tiny bridge, a small repair to the city's torn fabric. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The hospital board meeting, another shift at Morrison's, more reporters wanting to tell his story. But tonight, walking home with his best friend under the Detroit stars, Jaden Thompson felt the weight of his father's legacy not as a burden, but as a light showing the way forward. The Detroit General Hospital auditorium buzzed with conversation. 1 week had passed since the protests, since the moment that changed everything. Jaden stood backstage, adjusting the tie his mother had helped him pick out. You ready? Deshawn asked, peering through the curtain. Place is packed. Who's out there? Everyone. Whole neighborhood. Police brass. Hospital board. News crews. He grinned. No pressure. Sarah appeared in her new supervisor's uniform, pride shining in her eyes. Baby, they're ready for you. The scholarship ceremony had been her idea. A public event to announce the hospital's new community medical program, with Jaden as its first recipient. Officer Martinez sat in the front row, neck brace gone, but still moving carefully. Maria bounced excitedly beside her. Richard Martinez approached the podium. Today, we're not just awarding a scholarship. We're recognizing a moment when one young man reminded us what community really means. The spotlight found Jaden. His legs felt heavy as he walked out. A week ago, he began, his voice shaky. I put on my best shirt and went looking for a job. Instead, I found something else, a chance to be the person my father raised me to be. The audience quieted. In the second row, Mr. Morrison nodded encouragingly. People keep calling me brave, Jaden continued. But real bravery isn't about one moment. It's about all the moments that come after. The hard work of building bridges. The daily choice to see each other as people first. He saw Marcus Johnson with his megaphone tucked under his chair. The sergeant who'd protected him on the courthouse steps. Mrs. Rodriguez wiping her eyes. My father died trying to help someone who was hurting. Last week, I had a chance to do the same thing. But the real story isn't what happened on those courthouse steps. It's what's happening now. He gestured to the audience. Look around. Police officers and protesters sitting together. A hospital changing its policies. A community deciding to be better than its fears. Sarah smiled through her tears. Deshawn gave him a thumbs up from backstage. This scholarship isn't just for me. It's for every kid who dreams of helping others. For every person who's tired of watching bridges burn. For everyone who believes that mercy matters more than anger. Officer Martinez stood slowly, supporting herself on Maria's shoulder. Others followed, until the whole auditorium was on its feet. My father used to say that life tests us when we least expect it. Jaden's voice grew stronger. But maybe the real test isn't in those big moments. Maybe it's in all the small choices we make every day. The choice to help, to listen, to see each other's humanity. The applause started softly, then built. Richard Martinez handed him the scholarship certificate, but Jaden wasn't finished. Tomorrow, I'll go to my job at Morrison's Market. Next month, I'll start pre-med classes. But the most important work isn't in any classroom or store. It's out there in our streets, in our hearts, in the space between what we are and what we could be. More people were crying now. Even the police chief dabbed at his eyes. My father died because help came too late. Officer Martinez lived because someone chose to help in time. That's the power we all have. The power to choose what kind of community we want to be. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Afterward, the reception line seemed endless. People wanted to shake his hand, share stories, make promises about the future. You did good, kid, the sergeant said, pumping his hand. The youth program starts next week. Still want in? Yes, sir, after my shift at Morrison's. Officer Martinez hugged him carefully. The department dinner's tomorrow. Ready to do this again? As long as Deshawn can still come. Already got him a seat at the main table. Maria tugged at his sleeve. Mom says you're going to be a doctor like the ones who helped her. Will you take care of me when I'm sick? I'll take care of anybody who needs help, Jaden promised. That's what doctors do. The reception wound down. Sarah found him sitting alone in the hospital chapel. Your father would be so proud, she said, touching his cheek. I know. I feel him sometimes. Like he's watching. He is. In the way you carry yourself. In the choices you make. They walked home through the cooling evening. The courthouse steps had become a memorial of sorts. Flowers, cards, messages of hope. Someone had painted a mural on the wall. A black teenager kneeling beside a fallen officer, surrounded by the words, "Choose mercy." Where to see yourself like that? Deshawn asked, walking with him. Where to see how one moment can change everything. But it wasn't just one moment. It was all the moments that followed, Morrison teaching him to register with patient respect. The police chief asking his opinion on community programs, Maria showing up at the market after school to do her homework while he stocked shelves. Small bridges built one interaction at a time. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, community center meeting tomorrow. New ideas for youth programs you coming. Then Officer Martinez. Maria got an A on her essay about you. Says she wants to be a doctor too now. And finally, Mr. Morrison, don't forget your opening tomorrow. 6 a.m. sharp. Proud to have you on the team. Jaden Thompson looked up at the Detroit sky, at the city stretching out around him. Somewhere out there, another teenager was facing their own moment of choice. Another bridge waited to be built or burned. You okay, baby? Sarah asked. Yeah, Mom? I'm good. Just thinking about tomorrow. Because that was the real legacy, not the scholarship or the speeches or the newspaper headlines. It was the daily choice to be better than yesterday. To help when it would be easier to walk away. To see people as people, beyond uniforms and anger and fear. His father had died trying to help someone who was hurting. But his son lived on, turning that final act of mercy into a lifetime of choices that echoed through the streets of Detroit, changing lives one small moment at a time. The sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new chances to choose between anger and understanding. But tonight, walking home with his mother and his best friend, Jaden Thompson knew exactly who he was and what he stood for. Not a hero, not a traitor, just a person trying to be better than his fears, building bridges in a city that desperately needed them, carrying his father's legacy forward one choice at a time. A police car drove past slowly. The officer inside waved. Jaden waved back. Small moments, tiny bridges, the future unfolding one heartbeat at a time. "Race you home," Deshaun challenged, breaking into a run. Jaden laughed and ran after him, his dress shoes clicking against the Detroit pavement, while his mother watched with tears in her eyes and the city held its breath, waiting to see what tomorrow would bring. But tomorrow could wait. Tonight was for celebrating how far they'd come, and all the distance yet to travel, one step at a time, one choice at a time, one bridge at a time, until the space between what they were and what they could be finally closed for good.